Diane detonates after Jack has sex with Patty, and Victor kicks Nikki to the curb. At the marina, Diane continues worrying to Billy and Kyle about Jack being in Patty's clutches. Who knows what kind of shape he could be in? A captain pulls up with a boat ready. Diane, Billy, Diane are on the yacht. Jack stops the makeout session with Patty, but only briefly. He can't resist her. They end up out of the bed and up against the porthole to do some more undressing. Jack, a full, passionate participant now, takes Patty back to bed. Patty, Jack, Diane after sex. Jack can't believe it happened. 1 minute, he's trying to escape, and the next, he's tearing off Patty's clothes. She tells him to live in the moment and be one with the universe. They hear a rapping at the door and Diane bursts in. Her jaw drops. Jack, Patty, Diane by the time Billy and Kyle catch up. Jack's scrambling to dress himself. Kyle covers his eyes as Diane screams at her husband that they thought Victor had him locked in a cargo hold and his life was in danger. She doesn't even know how to process this. Diane's anxiety had been building for hours at the marina, her thoughts spiraling as she paced back and forth, barely hearing Billy and Kyle's attempts to calm her. All she could picture was Jack trapped, helpless, possibly injured, because the last they'd heard. Victor had him stashed away somewhere like a pawn in one of his ruthless games, and the uncertainty was eating her alive, pushing her closer and closer to the edge. When the captain finally arrived with a boat ready to take them out, Diane didn't hesitate. She practically leapt aboard, urging them to move faster, her voice tight with urgency and dread. The ride across the water felt endless, every second stretching her nerves thinner, until at last the yacht came into view, quiet and deceptively peaceful against the dark water, a stark contrast to the chaos she felt inside. Meanwhile, aboard that very yacht, the reality was something Diane could never have imagined. Jack, who had initially tried to resist Patty's advances, found himself pulled into a moment he couldn't fully explain, a whirlwind of confusion, vulnerability, and impulse that overtook his better judgment. What began as resistance quickly blurred into surrender, his emotions tangled as Patty urged him to forget everything else and just exist in the moment with her, free from guilt, from expectations, from the weight of his complicated life. Afterward, as the haze began to lift, Jack sat there in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the man he believed himself to be with what had just happened, while Patty, serene and almost otherworldly, spoke about connection and destiny as if none of it carried consequences. But consequences were already crashing toward them in the form of a furious knock at the door, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore, and, before either of them could react, the door burst open and Diane stormed in. The sight that met her eyes shattered something deep inside her, her breath caught, her body going rigid as the truth hit her all at once, more devastating than any fear she had entertained on the way there. This wasn't a rescue, this was betrayal. Jack scrambled, trying to pull himself together, his mind racing for explanations that didn't sound hollow even to his own ears, while Patty remained unervingly calm, watching the explosion unfold with a strange detachment. Moments later, Billy and Kyle rushed in behind Diane, only to be met with a scene that none of them were prepared for. Kyle instinctively turned away, shielding his eyes as if that could erase the image, while Billy stood frozen, caught between shock and anger. Diane's voice cut through the room, raw and trembling with rage and heartbreak as she demanded to know how this could have happened, how the man she had been terrified for, convinced was in mortal danger, could instead be here like this, shattering their marriage in an instant. She spoke of the fear, the desperation, the sleepless hours spent imagining the worst, only to be confronted with something that felt even worse than loss, betrayal chosen in a moment of weakness. Jack tried to speak, to explain the confusion, the emotional turmoil, the way everything had spiraled out of control, but his words fell flat under the weight of Diane's pain, each excuse sounding more like an admission. And as the confrontation reached its boiling point, the ripple effects extended far beyond that yacht, because elsewhere, Victor was making moves of his own, casting Nikki aside with a cold finality that mirrored the destruction unfolding in Jack and Diane's world. Relationships that once seemed unbreakable were cracking under pressure, secrets and impulsive decisions detonating like carefully placed charges. Back on the yacht, Diane's fury gave way to something quieter, but far more dangerous, a wounded resolve, the kind that signals a point of no return, as she looked at Jack not with love, but with a dawning realization that whatever they had might not survive this moment. Kyle, shaken and conflicted, struggled to process the image of his father in such a compromising situation, while Billy's expression hardened, already anticipating the fallout that would ripple through the family and beyond. And at the center of it all stood Patty, an enigmatic presence who seemed both the catalyst and the calm within the storm, her influence impossible to ignore as she watched the lives around her unravel. In that confined space, surrounded by the quiet lapping of water against the yacht, everything changed. Trust was broken, loyalties were tested, and the fragile balance of their world tilted into chaos, leaving each of them to face the consequences of a moment that could never be undone. The air on the yacht was thick with tension, each second stretching painfully as Diane's eyes blazed into Jack's, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak all at once. Her hands trembled slightly as she clenched her fists, her body taut with adrenaline, while her mind raced through every memory of their years together, the promises, the shared laughter, the plans they had made. It all seemed like fragile glass now, shattered irreparably in the space of a few reckless, impulsive moments. Jack, still trying to pull himself together, tugged at his shirt in a futile attempt to reclaim some dignity, his face pale, his lips parted in disbelief. He had imagined this moment many times in his mind, rescuing Diane from the clutches of uncertainty, reuniting with her in relief, but never had he pictured it would be him standing accused, the architect of betrayal in the eyes of the woman who had been the center of his life. Patty, meanwhile, leaned casually against the headboard, her expression a mixture of triumph and calm detachment, as if the storm raging around her were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She didn't move to defend herself, didn't flinch under Diane's furious gaze. To her, this moment was simply the culmination of the game she had been playing all along, a game of influence, seduction, and control. Every touch, every whisper, every subtle nudge had led to this point, and she reveled quietly in the chaos she had created. She spoke softly, almost conspiratorially, to Jack, reminding him of the universe, the moment, the connection they had shared, trying to anchor him in her reality, even as Diane's rage threatened to consume everything. Billy, who had arrived with Kyle moments earlier, could hardly believe what he was seeing. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight as he took in the scene. Jack, the man he respected and often looked up to as a mentor, now completely exposed, not just physically, but morally and emotionally. Billy felt the weight of betrayal not only for Diane, but for the family as a whole. He knew that what had happened in this room would not remain a secret, and that Genoa City's intricate web of gossip, rumors, and media scrutiny would magnify it 1,000-fold. Kyle, standing beside him, was less vocal but no less affected. The image of his father in such a compromising and morally ambiguous position was something that would linger in his mind, reshaping the way he thought about trust, loyalty, and family. He instinctively turned his gaze away when Patty's eyes met his, sensing the silent tension between them, the unspoken judgment that only a child could feel when witnessing adult mistakes. Diane finally found her voice, her tone sharp, dripping with incredulity. "Jack, what? How?" The words caught in her throat as she struggled to articulate the tempest of emotion within her. Anger, betrayal, and sorrow collided with fear, the fear that the man she had loved so completely was now lost to impulses she couldn't understand. She pressed forward, her body moving closer to Jack, her hands trembling not with weakness, but with a determination that was both terrifying and heart-wrenching. "You were supposed to be locked away. Victor had him in a cargo hold. And instead, this is what you're doing." Jack opened his mouth to respond, but the words felt hollow. There was no excuse that could explain his actions without sounding feeble. "Diane." He began, but Diane cut him off with a sharp gesture, her eyes blazing. "No, Jack. Don't speak." Just look at what you've done." Her voice cracked, revealing the depth of her anguish. She turned to Billy and Kyle, her expression pleading, as if seeking a lifeline, some validation that the world had not completely gone mad. "Can you believe this?" she demanded. "The man we were terrified for, the man we thought was in danger, and this is what he's doing? This betrayal." Patty finally moved, stepping down from the bed with a deliberate grace, her movements calm and controlled, contrasting sharply with Diane's storm. "Diane, you need to calm down," she said, her tone almost soothing. "Jack is here. He's safe. Isn't that what matters?" But Diane's eyes blazed even brighter, if that were possible. "Safe," she spat. "Safe? You call this safe? How can I even look at him and not see this?" Her gaze swept over Jack in a way that cut deeper than any knife could. Jack flinched, realizing that nothing he could say or do would undo the image that had now been seared into Diane's memory. Billy stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on Diane's shoulder. "Diane, I know this is overwhelming, but maybe we should try to get everyone calm first. Let's just breathe." Diane shook him off, her energy unrelenting. "No, Billy. There's nothing to calm. There's nothing to fix. Jack made a choice. And that choice, it wasn't me, it wasn't our family, it was her." She nodded toward Patty, her finger trembling with the force of her accusation. "And I'm supposed to just accept this? Pretend this didn't happen?" Kyle, quieter but equally affected, whispered under his breath, "Dad, what did you do?" His voice was small, tentative, but it cut through the room like a blade. Jack met his son's eyes, feeling a pang of guilt that he could not reconcile. He wanted to reach out to explain, to bridge the chasm he had created, but the bridge had already begun to crumble. Meanwhile, in another part of Genoa City, Victor Newman was making his own power plays, casting Nikki aside with a decisive coldness that mirrored the emotional devastation unfolding on the yacht. Nikki, usually unshakable, felt the sting of rejection deeply, realizing that Victor's ambitions and personal whims always came first, no matter the collateral damage. The city, as always, was a chessboard for the Newmans, the Abbotts, and their interconnected families, a place where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal could strike at any moment. Back on the yacht, Diane's fury began to shift, morphing from raw emotion into a focused resolve. This was no longer about confrontation alone. This was about reckoning. She had loved Jack, trusted him, risked everything for him, but now she understood that trust had limits, that love had boundaries, and that some moments could irreversibly alter the course of their lives. She turned to Jack, her voice low but deadly serious. "You need to understand, Jack, this changes everything. I don't know how we move past this, but it's not just going to disappear." Jack swallowed hard, his usual composure gone. He had always been a man who thought he could navigate any storm, manipulate any situation, control outcomes, but now he realized that life, emotions, and consequences often moved beyond his influence. He opened his mouth, paused, and then closed it again, the weight of his choices pressing down like a vice. Patty, sensing the shift in dynamics, tried to intervene. "Diane, don't make this about hate. It's complicated. You have to see that, Jack." But Diane cut her off with a shake of her head. "No, Patty. This isn't about you being complicated. This is about betrayal. About choices. About the fact that I risked everything to find him, and the moment I do, I see this." She gestured toward Jack again, her hands trembling with a combination of rage and despair. Billy sighed, realizing that words might no longer suffice. "Diane, maybe what we need right now is space. Let's take a moment." But Diane's mind was already racing ahead, plotting next steps, considering the implications, and bracing herself for the inevitable fallout that would ripple through their lives. She looked at Jack with a new clarity, no longer through the lens of love or longing, but through the sharp, unforgiving lens of someone betrayed. Jack, still partially undressed, felt the full weight of his actions pressing on him. He had underestimated the consequences, underestimated Diane's love, underestimated the moral and emotional gravity of what he had done. Every instinct he had, every impulse, seemed to betray him now. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to make amends, but he knew that some wounds could not be healed with words alone. Patty, ever the observer, finally stepped back, her eyes cold but calculating. She had stirred the storm, watched it unfold, and now she waited, knowing that every reaction would feed into her advantage. She had won a moment, but the war for influence in Genoa City was far from over. And Diane, standing tall amidst the chaos, realized that this was a turning point, not just for her marriage, but for her entire life. She could not undo what had happened, but she could decide how she would respond. The choice now was hers: succumb to despair, or channel the fury and heartbreak into action, into reclaiming control over her destiny, over her family, over her life. In the silence that followed, broken only by the faint lapping of water against the yacht, each character faced the enormity of the moment. Jack faced the shattered trust of the woman he loved. Diane faced the betrayal that had upended her world. Billy and Kyle faced the collision of family loyalty and shock. And Patty faced the knowledge that her influence had consequences beyond the immediate thrill of conquest. It was a moment suspended in time, charged with emotion, tension, and the undeniable truth that nothing would ever be the same again. And as the yacht gently rocked in the marina's calm waters, the ripples of one reckless, impassioned act began to spread outward, promising heartbreak, confrontation, and upheaval in ways that would engulf every corner of Genoa City. The moment Diane stormed off the yacht, leaving Jack scrambling to collect his scattered dignity, the reverberations of the betrayal began to spread like wildfire through Genoa City. Diane's mind raced as she drove away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, every red light and turn punctuated by flashes of Jack's betrayal. Each memory of their years together collided violently with the image she had just witnessed, the man she loved, surrendering to someone else, in a moment so intimate it could never be unseen or forgotten. She felt rage, disbelief, and heartbreak intermingled, a storm that threatened to drown her in its intensity. But even as her chest heaved with anguish, a part of her mind began to plot, calculating the steps she would need to protect herself, her family, and the fragile fragments of her own dignity. Back on the yacht, Jack remained frozen, partially clothed, a sense of helplessness settling over him. Billy tried to guide him to some semblance of composure, but Jack's mind kept circling back to Diane's face, the shock, the anger, the hurt that he had inflicted, not by malice, but by weakness and desire. Every rational thought battled with the impulse-driven chaos of the moment, and he felt as though he were trapped in a psychological storm with no way out. Kyle, standing nearby, struggled to reconcile the father he knew with the man he had just seen. His voice, barely audible, betrayed his inner turmoil. "Dad, I don't even know who you are right now." Jack wanted to reach out to explain, but words felt like betrayal themselves, hollow and insufficient. Meanwhile, Patty, calm and measured, stepped toward Jack, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You see, Jack," she said softly, "you just needed to let go. To be fully in the moment. Isn't that freeing?" Jack shook his head, the weight of shame pressing down on him. "No, Patty," he muttered, voice thick with remorse. This wasn't freedom. This was chaos. This was wrong." But Patty only smiled enigmatically, a subtle smirk that suggested she understood the power of manipulation far better than Jack ever could. As Diane sped away from the marina, she decided that hiding in silence was no longer an option. The first person she called was Nikki. If there was anyone who could help her navigate this storm, or at least offer guidance through Victor's inevitable interference, it was Nikki, her old friend, someone who had survived countless Newman's manipulations and betrayals. Nikki answered after the first ring, her voice calm but curious. "Diane? Is everything okay? Everything?" "No, Nikki, nothing is okay." Diane's voice broke with anger and despair, forcing Nikki to sit down immediately, bracing herself. Diane recounted the events at the yacht, the shocking betrayal, Jack's surrender to Patty, the stunned reactions of Billy and Kyle, every detail poured out, unfiltered and raw. Nikki listened, absorbing each word with the practiced calm of someone who had weathered storms far greater than most. "Oh, Diane," Nikki whispered when Diane finally paused to breathe. I don't even know what to say. I mean, Jack, with Patty, she struggled for words. It's devastating. I can't believe he would do that. Diane nodded, fighting back tears. I can't believe it either. I risked everything thinking he was in danger, thinking he needed me. And instead, he's here, giving himself to her like it meant nothing. Her voice cracked, shaking with fury. And Victor. God, I can't even